Hello, my name is Britton Kitchens, and this is my response to reading Richard Lee's Eating Christmas in the Kalahari. After reading Richard Lee's Eating Christmas in the Kalahari, I was really reminded how powerful worldview is in shaping the way that we interpret meaning. The article tells the story of Lee, who was an anthropologist who had been living among the Kong people in southern Africa. As Christmas approached, he wanted to thank them for their hospitality towards him by buying a large ox for a community feast he had planned. Now, in his mind, this was a very generous gift. He waited weeks watching all the cattle coming in, waiting for the absolute right ox to come that he would purchase. He wanted to be large enough to not only feed the people for the feast, but enough that they would be able to dance and celebrate for days, and even have enough for them to take with them as they left. Now, in his mind, this was a very, very generous gift again. This was his way of showing appreciation and goodwill. But instead of gratitude, the Kung people actually laughed at him. They called his act small, scrawny, and not even worth eating. Lee was extremely frustrated and even insulted, which who wouldn't be, thinking that they were being rude and ungrateful. But later on, he found out that the reaction wasn't an insult at all, but it was actual cultural practice they had implemented. The Kong people deliberately downplay others' accomplishments to prevent pride and to actually promote equality. What he saw as disrespect was actually humility in action. That moment taught Lee, and it honestly taught me too, that meaning depends on culture. The same action can be seen completely different depending on how we've been taught to view the world. Now, what really stood out to me about this story is how worldview affects our communication. From our Western perspective, which is also Lee's, a gift is supposed to bring praise and honor to the giver. His culture connects generosity to recognition. You give something big and people thank you for it. But in the Kong worldview, community harmony and humility matter more than one person's actual good deeds. But by teasing him, they were actually reinforcing a cultural value that protects their unity. That moment, sorry, really captures how our worldview shapes what we can expect from others. Lee's frustration wasn't because the Kong were wrong, but it was because his lens didn't fit their world. Another key idea in this story is ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism happens when we assume our way of thinking or living is the right or what we consider to be the normal way. Lee's bias was very clear. He assumed that his way of giving the gifts and showing kindness was universal. He thought that the Kong people would interpret his generosity the same way that he would. When they didn't, he felt extremely offended. But it was only after reflecting did he realize that he was the one misunderstanding the actual situation. This story challenged me to think about how easy it is to believe that our cultural values are actually the best one. In American culture, for example, we often connect generosity with recognition, but the Kong showed that generosity can be about balance instead of intention. It reminded me that humility looks different in every culture, and that different doesn't actually mean wrong. A personal experience that I had made this lesson very real for me, which happened at work. I once was training a new employee when I was working in downtown Chicago with Luxottica. I was one of the regional trainers, so anyone who will be hired at a different store was expected to come in and see me first before they were actually assigned to the other store. And I was training a young lady at that time who, as I would talk to her and as I would train her, she never actually made eye contact with me. At first, I thought that she was being dismissive or she was uninterested in what it was that I had to say or what I was training her on. But actually, over time, I learned that in their culture, avoiding direct eye contact um, to someone that they viewed in authority was actually a sign of respect and not of actual avoidance. This completely changed the way I viewed our interactions and our trading. What I thought was actually disrespect towards me was her way of showing honor. It made me realize how quick we can be to label someone's behavior without understanding the actual meaning behind it. Another example that comes to mind is something as simple as how we celebrate birthdays. In our culture, well, at least in my culture, birthdays are big events. We throw parties, we bring gifts, and we make the person the center of attention, not only just for that day, but we like to celebrate all week, all month long. This is our way of showing love to them. But to someone from a different culture that values modesty or values community over individuality, that could seem a very prideful, excessive, or even wasteful. Again, it's all about perspective. Our worldview colors how we interpret behavior over something as normal as a celebration. When it comes to communication across cultures, I think one of the best practices we can take away from this story is to pause before we judge other people. Instead of assuming, we should ask, listen, and try to understand them. Which, if Lee had done this, the Kong, if Lee would have done this, and if he had asked the Kong people why they were teasing him instead of actually taking offense first, he could have learned their custom of humility, much sooner, um, versus the time that he had. Curiosity is such a simple but powerful tool in communication, I believe. When we choose to ask questions instead of making assumptions, we open up the door to understanding. What I took away most from this story was that worldview and perception shapes every part of our communication. What feels generous, polite, or respectful in one culture can mean something completely different in another one. We don't always need to travel across the world to experience these differences. They happen in our classroom, for myself, in our workplaces, and communities in everyday life. For me, this story was a reminder that humility is key. True intercultural communication starts when we're willing to step back from our own assumptions and see life through someone else's eyes. That shift from defending our worldview to exploring someone else's worldview changes everything about the way that we connect. So in the end, Lee didn't just give the Kung people a Christmas ox. They actually gave him the gift of something even greater, which was the gift of perspective. Thank you.